Hey, Tonje.
Hey, Abby.
Good to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
I think I can say you are my first guest on this show, somewhere in the middle. And I'm honored to have my good friend here. But more importantly, or just as importantly, you are an entrepreneur. And you've been an entrepreneur for as long as I've known you and for over a decade before I've known you. It's a very painful journey to be an entrepreneur. Why do you keep doing it? Why have you done it? And why do you keep doing it?
I think no one in my life ever ended an opportunity to me. No one came with a job, the dream job, and said, like, take it. So from a young age, like when I was like 13 or 14 years old, I realized that if I want something, I have to build it. I'm on my own. And so I trained this muscle called entrepreneurship. And it's hard. It's a lot of pain. Like when you go to the gym, right? But it gave me so much freedom. I can do whatever I want, meaning that I'm able to explore whatever opportunity or industry if I want to. It doesn't mean that I will be successful, but it means that I can explore. I have the freedom to explore.
Do you think that a bit of trauma is responsible for why you've become an entrepreneur? Because you talked about getting what you want, and or rather that when you want something you have to go after it. Is there trauma involved? I know trauma is sort of du jour. Everyone talks about trauma today, but
No, I love talking about trauma. But what I want to say is like trauma is like the source of everything. So yes, frustration is a good catalyst for anything in your life, and so it had definitely had an impact on me. Um, but it's mostly this like quest for happiness and freedom, and not asking for permission. And through my years of entrepreneurship, I explored like corporate jobs at big media companies, and I went through the process where you have like 12 interviews in 4 countries, because sometimes as an entrepreneur you want like some stability. You want to feel safe. You don't want to be the one taking like all the bets, right? And going through like those interviews, and like being exposed to the corporate world and the politics, I realized that the price to pay to join the corporate, it was corporate America, was too high for my soul.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that it's bad. It's just like the way my soul is set up is not compatible with this world. So, to answer your question, I create project and entrepreneur. That's the only way I can feel alive.
so it's really important to you to feel alive in the work that you do.
Yeah, like I need to breathe. So it's like for me, it's we have one life,
Right.
right? And people sometimes act like it's just like first take, and if it doesn't work after this life, it's gonna be like take two,
Right.
right? I don't know where I get that, but I'm not reading the same book,
Right.
and so I'm very conscious that I just have like those years, and I have to make the most of it. And making the most of it is trying to be fulfilled. I'm not even talking yet about happiness. Like what do I do with this time, right? And what I do has to be meaningful for me first. Then if it has an impact, it's great. But first is like I need to be fulfilled by what I do. I need to feel like I grow. I need to feel like this time I have on earth, I'm doing something that is bringing me joy, you know?
Right. We're going to talk a little bit about this notion of happiness and joy, and examine a bit about whether or not it's a journey, a way to travel, or a destination. But before we get there, let's talk about your ventures, the entrepreneurship journey that you've taken. You were the CEO and founder of a media platform called Afrostream. And one of the things, and that's how we met, one of the things about Afrostream is that it was a first to market endeavor. No one was really creating a streaming platform that essentially spoke to and entertained Africans, African Americans, Caribbean. Can you talk about what led you to start Afrostream? And, I want to dig into some of the challenges that you had as well with that company.
Sure. Like as a African person, born and raised
Where are you from in Africa?
Cameroon.
Okay. West Africa?
It's technically it's like in the center, but I know like West Africans they want me.
We want to own everything.
But so born and raised in Paris, France. For me, it was important to connect with my, heritage and also have access to great stories about our leaders. I needed to have like role models that look like me. And because Black people are all over the world, I always felt frustrated to not have access to their stories. And there's so many like Black festival, like African festival all over the world, but it's impossible to find the content. So I was like, if there's no home for those like movies, short films, documentaries, let me leverage technology and build a platform. And at least if you have enough catalog volume, then you can attract an audience that will help you monetize, like the whole thing. And it was pretty ambitious because I had some friends, like a friend in particular, Jason Joku, who's the founder and CEO of Iroko. So it's a platform for Nollywood content, but it was specific to Nigerian content. What I wanted to do was a platform for global African and Black content, right? So we had like Caribbean content. We had like content produced in the UK with the African diaspora. Same with content produced in France, but also in Senegal, Cameroon, Nigeria. So something global. And I was able to partner with Sony, Disney, Warner Brothers to have also some of their African American content.
Do you feel that you were too early? And why I say too early is obviously Afrostream is no longer in its original iteration. Give us I want you to talk about the timeline, but also what were some of the challenges, that led to you sort of taking a different route in your entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah. So I started Afrostream in 2013, and I started back in Europe. And just to give you context, Netflix was not yet available in France in 2013. So launching a streaming service at this time, you had to educate first, like the market. So it was hard for any type of streaming services. Um, I don't think I was too early. I think my model was wrong. So I went to the VC type of funding, and I was pitching like a potentially profitable business. And I was lucky, I raised funds from Y Combinator, from Comcast, from like Warner Brothers.
But you say you were lucky. Why do you think you're lucky?
Black in tech in 2013, 14, being able to raise funds, like,
Do you think that's a feature of luck?
I think so. Not because I wasn't talented enough, but because of, I was one of the first French entrepreneurs going through this incubator. I was the first African getting into this incubator. When I sat down with investors, I know that my French accent gave me a privilege, compared to other African Americans entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of factors that made it easier for me, and that's why it's luck or privilege, but it's not just like a virtue of like being smart.
Okay, so I want to examine that a little bit more. So you are doing these partnerships, you have this ambition, but the business model, you said there were some challenges with the business model.
Yeah. So I was pitching like a potentially profitable business, and I think that now that I know more about like what happened, like fast forward, I think the only way to be successful with this dream that I had would have been to build like a non-profit business. And so because the mission was more important for me than the business, because like when you look at the numbers, it doesn't make any sense. Like you need so much content, invest in so much like original like productions to increase the quality of our content, and you need the marketing dollars to acquire new subscribers. I think that if I had to do it again, I would position Afrostream as a nonprofit, raise money to different organizations, and pitch that it's important for us to have a platform that reflects different like forms of African or Black identity, and I will have donors, and those people will definitely think that this platform has to exist. It's important for humanity to have this platform.
And so the business model essentially saw you acquiring or licensing content for the diasporic marketplace, right? Is your view that there isn't, or let me challenge you in this regard. I don't want to say it's going to be a controversial question, but is there a market for content and entertainment that specifically engages just the African diaspora? And do those business models offer the kind of scale that we see the Netflixes and the Amazons benefit from, who are also able to offer content that features people that look like you and I, but can also cater to other non-diasporic audiences?
So you talk about profitability, right? So it depends how much you spend on your content, right? If you spend almost nothing, yes, there's a market, and you will eat profitability. If you have to compete with Netflix productions, it would be challenging. So that's why I'm talking about like a non-profit model where you go to donors and institutions and they're like, producing this content, it's like Wikipedia. It's important. Humanity needs to have a platform that support those stories, right? I I always think about AI, and like if someone with bad intention ask AI, okay, there's like 10 billion people on Earth, so in the future, we need space. Who has to go? Based on the stories that were told in the past, like AI will go through all the movies, all the books available, and we're like,
right.
They have to go.
That's I didn't think about that. That's a movie. That's a script right there.
And so if we don't talk, like we don't share our stories, if we don't share our view of the world, and we rely only on AI to make this type of decisions, like we would be in a bad position. So I always think that, and it's an extreme example, right? But I think that if you go to some institutions and donors and you explain why you do this platform, it will help you produce amazing content like NPR type of and it's okay if you're not like profitable right away. But when you pitch P and VCs, this is not the same story. And I think it was my mistake. And if I have to do it again, I would do it for the political aspect and the why it's important for humanity, rather than let's build a Netflix app.
So you would spend more time with impact funds than sort of VCs looking for profitability. Yeah. So the funding model essentially, beyond the business model, but the funding model also affected your business significantly. Definitely. The VCs tend to expect a faster return, hockey stick growth, that don't allow you to achieve the vision that you set out.
I want literally to do like it's almost like a museum of content. This is like you know how like big families and donors like invest in like the New York Museum of MoMA stuff. It will be the same, but like
maybe there's an opportunity for a Criterion collection for African films that you can lead. You know, we'll plant seeds here. Take some equity in that endeavor.
It's not equity; it's non-profit.
You know, so entrepreneurship, it's challenging. You've got a lot of reasons noble reasons why you decided to go in that direction. You talked a little bit about happiness and that your happiness is something that you prioritize. Is happiness overrated?
I think for people who never like had a taste of it, maybe. But like, why are we here? Like, first you breathe, your life. You already won because you know how the process, right? And you already
tell us.
But like you're here, you're a winner. Now you have like yes, different contexts. So for some it's like feels like more comfortable, for some others just like you won because your life, but like your life is threatened like at any time. So it's understand the change. But for me, it's like, what do I do with this opportunity? Being alive is an opportunity. And so through the years, I've learned how to manage my energy and see like the people who I spend time with. I had this mentor who told me in the past that when you're about to die and you're in your bed, you will think about all the time you spend with like useless people. And you will want to have this time right now because you're about to die.
Right.
And unfortunately, years after this conversation with his mentor, I was next to him right before he died.
Oh, wow.
And you know, I was is someone that I loved. I worked with him for years. And it was like devastated because it was like a cancer, brain cancer. But he had a good life. if I know someone who was like full of life, happy, doing, he was also an entrepreneur, but also an actor. So he was like doing like the most of his time. And so I was sad for him, but I was like, he had a good life. Sometimes I'm even like, even more sad for people who were miserable and they go, and I'm like, they didn't have the opportunity to enjoy their life. So back to happiness, when you are conscious that this thing that we experience called life has an end, you have to maximize, like the joy, because it could end like sooner than later. And it's because I know in my bones that I'm blessed, that I make sure that I have like a great experience.
So, but how do you define happiness?
Great experience.
Great
So,
experiences.
yeah, it's like, that's why I don't use like a good time, because a good time sounds like, oh, you go to like an happy hour. Like a great experience is, so I spend a lot of time traveling, and even like in the plane, like talking, engaging with someone, the staff or a passenger next to me, and having a conversation with me. Oh, this time was great. I've learned something. I felt good, and also, obviously, hopefully, I provided something to this person, but it was like a genuine interaction, and I feel alive, right? So those are the things I love. This is not about wealth, even if for me it's important to feel safe. Um, it's about creating those connections and having a good experience.
So there's been a lot of emphasis on happiness in the last 50, 30 years. Books on happiness, a million social media accounts dedicated to happiness. In your opinion, is happiness sustainable? Is it a way to travel? Is it a destination? But more importantly, how do you define happiness? Well, you did define happiness. You said happiness is about experiences, right?
Exactly.
But is there an overemphasis on happiness in our society?
I don't think so. Like, again, why are we here? Um, what do we do with the time we have, and what is our experience? Like, if you know you're gonna live 100 years, you want to have the best experience, right? And I think in the past, people had not a strong notion on happiness, because when you want to exploit the labor of others, uh, it's harder when they are conscious that happiness is important. So what you sell is that, man, this life gonna be hard, but don't worry, the next one you'll be happy. And it works for some people, right? But
Mm.
I think that for people like me who think about this one and only opportunity to be happy, because I have no guarantee that I have another life or something after this experience, I'm betting on this one.
So, in some ways, what I'm almost hearing from you is that, and you raise a very interesting point about in the previous life,
Mm?
you could almost make the argument that this is a lot of religious teaching, is that this life is for suffering, and where we are in the present is screw this notion that I'm going to enjoy life later. I'm going to be happy today.
And I don't know if it's religious. I think it's, when I look at, you can be spiritual and there's religion. And the way I see religion is like almost like a code of conduct. It's like it was like books tell people how to behave in society. Otherwise, we'll kill each other. Right. And
way to live. But indulge me for a second, because if we're looking at Christianity specifically, a lot of it is about personal salvation and the afterlife, this emphasis of the afterlife. It gave people a sense that, hey, I can work really hard in this life. Things can go terribly wrong in this life. I have no control and agency in this life for the most part, and I'm going to enjoy it later.
So when the king tells you to go to war against his cousin, you will do it. Right. It was like,
right.
So, yeah.
And so this is interesting because, again, as an entrepreneur, and we talk about profit, is what has caused us to emphasize more on happiness today. Is it a feature of capitalism? Is capitalism the reason that we can pursue happiness?
I don't think so. I think it's because we know more about the universe. We know that, like there's no heaven.
Do we know that there's no heaven?
We know at least that it's not above the clouds, because we went there and we saw there's nothing.
Right.
Like we know that the sun is not, like a god. Like we know more, so we realize that we are nothing, and no one in the universe is impacted by our existence. And realize that the experience we have, like this thing called life on Earth, maybe happened like 1 billion years ago in another galaxy, in another form. So if we are so little and this thing is just magical, the belief that somehow there's another life, so like it's just like challenging to believe this. So because we're not sure of this myth, actually no one came back to say that it was like solid, but like we're like, okay, in the event of like no heaven, no second life or whatever, let's make the most of it. Let's make this life something that is we can enjoy and we can contribute and just like be decent one with each other.
So okay, I get this talk on happiness and you paint a very optimistic picture, and I'm generally an optimistic person, but obviously this podcast is somewhere in the middle for a reason, right? Because I fundamentally believe that the truth is somewhere in the middle. There are studies that show that we are increasingly more anxious. There's particularly amongst the young people.
Define we. Is we like the cool kids in New York? Is we, like people, like we means nothing.
Right. Okay, fair enough. Good qualifier. So young people, the youth.
Yeah.
In American society.
Okay.
Right. And you bring a very interesting perspective as, for all intents and purposes, a global person, a foreigner. You live in Paris, you do a lot of business in the United States, you go to Africa. American youth are increasingly anxious and depressed. There are studies that show that the average teenager has the anxiety level of a World War II veteran from the 1950s and 1960s. And there's a book, The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt, where he talks and explores these ideas. How are youth in France, for instance, or the youth that you encounter in Africa, do they exhibit this same level of anxiety? And if not, why? And if they do, then let's examine sort of the factors that contribute to this general anxiety that people are feeling today, even though there's so much conversation about happiness and pursuit of happiness.
I think globally, especially in the West, we see this high level of anxiety for teenagers, and the way it shows is through like suicidal kids. They also have like there's a lot of harassment, like in high school, and it's also the reason why um, so many people are anxious and depressed. And then when you think about the polarization of our societies, um, it's part of it. I think social media also play a big role in it because I remember growing up, I wasn't able to see where my friends were spending their holidays. They're like, "Oh, we went to uh, Sambat." I had no idea what is Sambat. No idea.
I've never been, but I hear a lot of yachts there.
Yeah, and it was in December, and we came back from holiday tan. But for me, I had no idea. Think about it. Today, you will see like while you stay, maybe like home, you see your friends like jet skiing, and so then you want this life. You want everything now. Um, so it's capitalism that has this huge capitalism plus social media plus this. I think this idea of having everything now. One thing that is always strange but amazed me in the US is that the society makes you feel like at 18 you should already have like a startup. You talk with people, and at 25 you should have already exited from this first company. And there's like so much pressure of being like super young and accomplish so much stuff. And before it was the exception. Now there's this culture of like, I was the first in my so young doing this thing, and this pressure. And that's why like the Forbes 30 under 30 is puts a lot of pressure on people.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to want to be under the Forbes list. And then I realized after being a publisher that it's all really just a big game
Yeah.
for advertisers.
And it's a lot of storytelling. And unfortunately, for the youth, they don't know it's storytelling. They don't know it's marketing. And so they try to have something that doesn't exist. It's like when a young person wants to look like they're this influencer or this celebrity, but they don't know that it's like AI that, like perfect their face or their body. And so they try to reach something that doesn't exist.
So, okay. Now, here's the paradox. You have this existential approach to life, really examining purpose and being, but your new company is focused on managing influencers.
Yeah.
Right?
To be precise,
Sure.
it's a tool that helps agencies to have more effective influence marketing campaigns. So
And it's for influencer agencies.
yes.
Okay, so how do you reconcile assisting a marketplace that in some ways contributes to sort of this ideal, right? The St. Bart's, every influencer is having the best life, the time of their lives, right? And is there conflict for you in that regard? Do you feel a responsibility that you felt, say, with Afrostream to provide something of service, or can you sort of separate?
So first I will describe my business and then explain like why I feel comfortable running it. So on scale, it's like a CRM for talent managers or agencies who engage and partner with influencers when it comes to branded content. So there's a brand working on this campaign with an influencer, and there's a lot of inefficiency in the way they communicate that result on campaign being delivered like like late. And so with like software, we help solve all those things. So when it comes to the brand side, we reduce the anxiety they go through running a campaign. But on the influencer side, we also make it simple for them to follow instructions and deliver the content. Uh, for us, it's really interesting because when you look at the marketing industry, this branding thing, influence marketing has like a significant portion of the businesses and is growing. When it comes to social media, what you just described, the fact that um, influencers are maybe like telling a story that is not necessarily always true. Um, that's exactly why I'm not running a social media. What I do is I empower brands, um, and I think that um, running a social media, if it has the effect that the current social media have on the youth, I won't be able to lead a company in that direction. It's easy to say today, but I really think that when I look of my involvement in politics, the thing I try to advocate for um, is incompatible with the harm that is created by those platforms. Um, I don't know, like I feel for those teenagers because I don't think I'd be happy
Mm-hmm.
if I was born in those years and going through all that thing. I don't know. I'm not equipped to do it. And if I go back to my own consumption of social media, um, I know you're gonna laugh, but the content I watch the most is the content I create. And you and I we talked about it, but like I use those platforms to create content. Like I feel I'm a content creator, but for myself, my own.
Right.
So it's a hobby. Some people do like the painting or whatever. For me, like creating content,
It's a hobby.
It's a hobby.
That's an interesting thing about sort of focusing and thinking of social media as a hobby. I want to pivot a little bit on sort of, it's a derivative of how people experience social media. You I don't know, you can let me know if I'm permitted to talk about sort of how investors felt about your social media platform a while ago.
Yeah.
There was a time you had some investors who would constantly, even though you were meeting the KPIs, the deliverables that they set out for your company, they felt sort of envious. I don't want to speak for them, but they had some issues with your lifestyle on social media. And if anyone doesn't know, Tonje, social media is full of life.
Yeah. So what I can say is that when you take investors' money
But
for
that
your
wasn't going to
business,
be my focus.
yeah, no, I will just be like
Yeah.
precise. It might help a lot of people. So when you raise funds for your venture, um, some investors think that um, they kind of own you, and um, so for Afrostream, I had to travel all over the world to acquire content, to set up partnerships, and so had the pleasure to be in South Africa, to be in Dakar, Senegal, Abidjan, those cities. And I was like taking pictures of those beautiful places, right? The nature, the people. And because people associate like beauty with leisure, um, some investors were commenting like, why are you always like in vacation or traveling? So it's not about traveling. It's about like when you create great content, great aesthetic, people think that
You're having
it's
a better
synonymous.
time than
Yeah.
you can have the same exact. You can be on the same trip, and your experience looks like you're having a blast because
Yeah.
you simply capture it
Yeah.
with a certain quality and characteristic.
And so what I did, because again, I'm here for happiness. I'm not here to educate anyone. Actually, I don't care. And I remember this thing about my time on my bed right before I die. I don't want to use this time to educate those people. So what I did is like 2 Instagram accounts. I have one corporate account and one private account where I continue to explore my hobby, creating content, watching my content, sharing with the people who actually understand why I do it and enjoy it. And that's it.
So the reason, so why I asked you that is because at the same time, and this is a very treacherous topic, unfortunately, but when you live a lifestyle focused on the pursuit of happiness and pleasure in that way, you do amass a number of sort of envious eyes.
Yeah.
And whether people understand how you're able to achieve your life or not, this does not affect how they feel. How do you deal with people who are envious of your lifestyle, particularly people who are even close to you, who eventually either turn to enemies or people who want to see you fail beyond sentiment, but also action?
So there's 2 things I do. The first one is it might be challenging for a lot of people, but I use the block button. There's a button for this.
You block everybody.
You block. The second is deeper. I do not care about them. And I respect most of them, but their opinion is not important for me. Again, like you have to remind yourself that you grew up without those people. None of those people fed you. Like you do not depend on those people on the like daily basis. So I recommend people to not be caught up in something where we feel like, no, but I need their approval. No, you don't need them. And so when you free yourself from their opinion, it's like, I don't care.
So do you feel that it dehumanizes you not to care?
No, because I care about other people. You don't have to care about everybody, right?
What if some of the people who have this envy of you and, the hate as they call it, what if they are coming from people that you absolutely care about?
So if someone I care about is envious, we'll have the conversation because I will see, and it happened. It happened in the past with family members where I saw that, their behavior changed a bit. So they like put this distance, and so after some time, I was like, "This is weird. Let's talk about it, right?" And also I adjust my behavior around. Actually, it's one person around this person. So I was like, okay, maybe my position in life make him feel less than.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe when I'm in the room, I will listen more to make him feel more comfortable. And it's totally okay because I care about him.
So there's a responsibility for you to make people who...
It's not a responsibility. It's like you have to be like intelligent. And there's like body language, there's like you have to feel the room, right? And so it's not about a responsibility, but if we are both sitting in the room, we should both enjoy being in the room.
We often say, you and I often say this, if you're in the room that I'm not in, then I'm in the room.
Exactly.
Right? And so there's sort of an abundance mindset. But, there are dynamics for certain groups of people where a scarcity mindset sets in, right? Whether it's a feature of racism or colonialism or just where you live in society. Let's talk about Africa for a bit. So, you and I are both from Africa. It's a continent we love dearly. We know a lot of the external challenges, right? Colonization, infrastructure, whatever the case may be. There are a lot of foreign meddling in our continent. Do you feel that there are some inherent challenges that we are responsible for, that we can control? And if so, what are those challenges that you think we suffer ourselves? And what are some of the things that we can do about it?
Definitely, there's a lot of things that we could do differently that are not the result of external forces. I think we value as African so much what foreigners will bring from their gods.
From their gods.
Because we believe, like, think about it, and I think it's like came, like, a lot of issues we have came from it. And again, I'm not an expert in religion. I'm not against religions.
Don't get canceled.
No, I'm just talking about
I'm
like
kidding.
My own thoughts, and I'm totally fine if people have different views, and that's the beauty of being humans. We can
That's right.
discuss.
That's right.
But I think when it comes to the context of Africa, one of the biggest challenge we had was the fact that we are so open. And so we had our own beliefs. We had what I will summarize like many gods. And when foreigners from the West came to us, one thing they brought is their God. And it's not that we were converted and be like, okay, let's disqualify our God and take. We're like, oh, let's add one more. But adding this one, and especially not necessarily the God, but the books who came with this God, had a huge impact here. All of a sudden, we are one of the rare people in the world that are praying for a God that doesn't look like them.
You know, you raise a very interesting concept that polytheistic religions are more open to accepting monotheist.
Yeah, because one more.
So it's just one more. It's just like, more. Hey, interesting.
But let me land.
Okay.
So the thing is, when this additional God became your main one, and everything that comes with it doesn't look like you, it's foreign to you, then you lose your own ownership.
But the notion of a God looking like us was not a prerequisite for us.
Yeah, but like,
because
it came with a book. It came with stories and definition of, like, if you look at the book and they say, God created humans and the best ones at his image.
Right.
And he don't look like it.
Right. I get your point. But what I'm saying is race as a way of categorizing, at least phenotypical, black, white, it's a social construct that came about, I don't know, 1700s, if I'm not mistaken, right? We have to look at some of that timeline. So before, we had no reason to think that the God's image is it requires that the God is black.
No.
Okay.
But when you look at, like, in Egypt,
right,
like, representation of God, you still had like an idea of like they were a representation.
Right.
That was so different. It was not human, so it's okay. It's not human, so we don't care. Could be an animal or whatever.
Right.
Once it's like human form.
Right. Okay.
And so my point, where I want to land is, all of a sudden, the thing you believe the most is foreign to you. You
outsource.
You outsource.
You outsource.
And all your beliefs are centered around this thing, but like you're not part of it. And so I think that I would love for the African continent to celebrate even more their other beliefs. It doesn't mean that you want to remove any big existing religion, but you want to explore more like what was like more like traditional or original, because it's part of your identity. Then you reconcile with ownership.
But some would argue there's
You.
there are many books, whether it's Thomas Sowell or The Wealth and Poverty of Nations or Guns, Germs, and Steel, or even Yuval Harari. There are theories that our diversity essentially works against us in Africa.
Why?
Because there are so many languages.
And?
There are so many religions.
And?
There are so many geographical distinctions. And that part of the reason that the West has been able to accumulate power is through the efficiency of a singular language, a singular way of being, homogeneity. And some could argue that in the East, having one religion being Islam has also benefited them, and in Asia and China.
In China, there's many languages and many regions.
But they are primary ones. They're dominant ones, whether it's Mandarin or.
But the thing is, like, within Africa, we had empires or populations speaking the same language, and I think our problem was technology. A lack of technology, or advanced technology. That's it. And it's still a problem today. And like, if you want to talk about like Europeans going to Africa, they went with like technology, so guns and steel and religion. So I can affect your body and your mind. Right. So I think if you ask me what are the things that could have an amazing impact for the future of Africa, is technology, and not necessarily religion, but like work on the mind. And it's like almost like we need a positive representation of ourselves. We need, like, heaven should look like ourselves.
So what does a positive representation look like?
It starts with our leaders.
You're one of our leaders.
It's hopefully, and I hope to have a bigger role in the future. But it starts with like a professor at the university, the way he will behave or she will behave, and the way they leverage their power. It starts with a policeman. Like, not even like, I'm not talking about like people working in government, but like local authorities, that it starts with them.
So, but what power is that? What's the fuel, right, behind that? What are...
Integrity.
I get that, but what is the sort of governing or unifying ideology? Because a lot of our discourse is in opposition to. A lot of what propels us is in opposition to or in comparison to the West. What is our indigenous galvanizing ideology and framework?
Honestly, I think we And when I say we, is like our people in the context of some African countries, right? I think we reach a level of poverty as countries. Obviously, there's billionaires and people with welfare, but let's talk seriously about like the majority. Reach a level of poverty that, um, in order to survive, you depend on donations from cousins, someone that has more resources than you locally, and corruption. But when you depend on donation, you have to sell your soul. It's like you're not able anymore to defend any idea or have any form of integrity. You will call anyone boss. You will like, what do you need? I want you to have more, like that you can give me some. When you lose your soul, no matter how many times you go to the temple or the church or the mosque, you're not able to think, you're not able to build a country, you're not able to fight for anything. And the reason why our countries are like this is not because we don't have the number, we could march on the government, but because we lost our soul. And corrupt politicians, with the help of foreign forces, worked for the past 50 years making sure that our people were losing their soul.
Are you hopeful?
I'm definitely
Optimistic?
I'm super optimistic.
What drives that for you?
The fact that there's no one empire that's remained at the top forever.
You're counting on the inevitable decline.
Yeah. Time is our friend. It might take like 200 years, but it's inevitable.
Are we prepared for the decline of the forces that subjugate us?
I don't wait for their decline. We just have to rise. Again, when you depend on someone giving you some stuff, you're not in charge of your own destiny.
What are some of the features that you're seeing today that you see are propelling us forward in the marketplace?
I think,
like, what are some of the aspects that you're seeing that it does give you hope that today you can point to?
the reason why people are leaving Africa to live in the West is because of the lack of opportunities and freedom. But when you spend time with them in the US or in France, they are very close to their African roots. And the only thing they want is to be able to go back when it will make sense, and contribute. That's what makes me hopeful, because, okay, what we have to change is what's happening in Africa. It's almost like easy to fix if there's no external forces playing with us, right? So ask any migrants if you would prefer being like in New York or in Lagos with the right setting. Most of them will say Lagos. We are so close to, like our people, where we grew up, our culture.
It's a unique response because it's not any particular, it's not, the ubiquitous Afro beats or whatever. You're saying the longing for home ultimately is what you're optimistic about.
Exactly.
And that persists.
We're not here because there's better food. Like, the food is great, yes.
But we prefer to eat our own, even if we're here. So you prefer Nigerian jollof?
You mean like the jollof that was created in Senegal? Even if I'm not Senegalese, but like I still know.
I'm fascinated. I want to ponder a bit more about that longing, that connection to home, because ultimately, when you look at the remittance numbers, they back your theory. This obligation. Interesting. What was the last good film you watched?
Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer. So we don't want to spoil it. I saw Oppenheimer. It's a fantastic film. What'd you like about it?
You realize that even if there's democracy, the UN, diplomacy, in the end, it's, are you strong or not? And if I'm stronger than you, yes, I'll be polite. But you will do as I say.
So the power dynamics is what drew you to it.
But how do you get this power?
How do you become strong?
Technology.
Today, technology is strength.
It's not today. It always has been.
What about during the religious ages? During the time when the proximity to the priest was what gave you agency?
Priests were protected by kings. Kings were protected by the army. Their army was strong because we had like
superior technology. Technology, huh?
Advancement. Technology. Yeah, you have to be like more advanced than your competition.
But what about the wielding of that technology? And I want to deal more into Oppenheimer. For instance, the Chinese invented the gunpowder. They invented the paper. But they didn't use it for what the Europeans ultimately used gunpowder for. And,
So then it's like your nature. And it's related to technology. Are you curious enough? Yes, there's like people who are like mean and they want to procure the world, but some people are just curious. And there's things in their education that allow them to be curious and explore.
Even in their culture.
Even in their culture. And so just to land,
yep.
There's some cultures, not all of them, but some cultures in Africa that prevent you to
be
curious. And again, some religion don't necessarily encourage you to be curious because they're like, it's written. If it's written, why you want to explore? It's written. You just have to follow this thing.
Right.
And maybe the way we use those books combined with our pre-existing cultures and tradition, this mix was not necessarily always the best for us.
So, and if we're going back to Oppenheimer to support your thesis, he was curious enough to come up with applications and even the theories inherent within quantum mechanics, right?
For me, it's not about him.
Okay.
It's about the US investing so much. It's about having universities that, support professors to do those research, even if you don't have any application yet. It's about the US being pragmatic enough to bring scientists from Germany and use them against the Nazis and their allies. So it's this idea of like you understand that this is important, and so.
By the way, I just want to say something. There's a meme, not in a physical meme, but a cultural meme, that there's no conversation that goes on for almost 2 hours where Nazis are not mentioned.
It had a huge impact, a very terrible impact, but huge. And so My point here is that if in your culture, engineering, is not something important, if science is not something important, I'm not talking about being spiritual or religion. I'm talking about science. If it's not something that you value, it's hard. And another thing played against us was the fact that in Africa, things were shared, like orally. It's hard to compete with a book.
So we should end this podcast because it's oral.
No, it's like nice captured. But like my point is like it's easier to perfect your science and your technology if it's written. So I'm not saying that there was no technology and science in Africa, but I'm saying that it's not a question of technology, it's a question of advancement.
Right.
Because if your enemy is more advanced, you lose.
They say part of the reason that the West was able to advance in the way it did is because of the written word, and it allows for laws to be preserved and communicated to society in a way that oral communication of laws don't allow for.
Exactly.
So just going back to Oppenheimer for a second, and this idea that power dynamics, we have a strong, powerful, a power dynamic at play across our society today. And in some ways, there are Marxist, communist, postmodernist uh, uh, frameworks at odds with sort of this capitalistic individual sort of dynamic. Do you see that at play at all in your dealings with people and your dealings with society and in systems? And if so, how does that pertain to Africa, and how do we acquire that power?
So in Africa, outside of my, wealthy friends, and so I don't count them because it's just not like the reality of our continent. Let's be honest, we want to project this affluent lifestyle and those things, but just like a minority. People are not thinking about capitalism or communism. They're thinking about like foodism. How do I eat? How do I? Let's not even talk about like energy, because like where I'm from in Cameroon, especially in some villages, electricity is something that is not common, right? So I think those things about like those models from the West are not yet critical for Africa. I think what we need on the continent is an abundance of energy and an abundance of intelligence. Because with those two things, you can do anything.
You know, Tonje, you think a lot, and there's a thesis that I've been playing around with that you also have just validated for me, is that in the West, the battle is the battle of ideals and ideas. And to your point, that is possible because we have provided resources that allow for us to focus on ideas. Whereas in Africa, it's a battle of resources. And if you're not fed, you can't even begin to philosophize.
Because you sell your soul to the first person who will give you like 100 nairas or 100 francs CFA, right?
Right, right.
And the reason why I don't think that we have to compare ourselves to the West is right now there's people coming to Africans and ask them, are you for France? Are you for Russia? But like, you have to choose a side. We need to choose the African side. It's every major country is making decisions based on the best interest of their people. It's always like the American president will do a deal with another country based on the best interest of the American people, and that's what you expect. But like the partners of African leaders, they expect those African leaders to make decisions based on the best interest of like the French people, the Brits, the Russians. And I think that's what is changing right now with the youth, and the way we have to look at even the models we want to follow is like, it has to be an African model. Democracy, same. Education, same.
We can go on.
I want to go on. I'm ready.
I know you do. I'm going to ask you one last question, because this will not be the last time that you're here. I want to have you here many, many, many times. Perhaps this might be a tradition, and we'll have many traditions on this show. What is an inconvenient truth that you want people to know about society, about humanity? You can take some time to think about it, or if you have it, it's a very inconvenient truth that you have acquired either through your experiences or through something you've read, and you can have many of them. What's an inconvenient truth that you want people to know about reality?
I think what I want people to realize is that democracy will never exist because it requires things that human beings cannot provide.
You mean so absolute democracy?
Yeah. It requires for human beings to be less selfish. It requires human beings to love others more than they can. It requires human beings to be honest about who they are, and something that is almost like impossible to do. And we can have version of democracy, but I don't think people are willing to accept the fact that a true democracy will not exist. And what I suspect is that people are confused about freedom and democracy. Like, democracy is like the power to the people, but it doesn't mean that you're free. And I think that in emerging countries, there's this opportunity to revisit what is freedom, how can we organize countries, societies. The other day in France, the Charles, the King of the United Kingdom, was invited by President Macron at Versailles. And I was watching the news and I was like, how come the French president of democracy is hosting with fast a king? So this idea of like, he's not elected by the people. Yes, he's loved by the people, but it's not elected by the people. It's a king. So it's like, do we need kings in Africa? Would it be okay to go back in the tradition, the stories, and like we have some like chiefs, but go and say like, okay, Cameroon needs to have a proper king, a royal family, that will rule the country for the next centuries. And above them, there's going to be like a prime minister that is like elected, but this royal family, he's there to guarantee freedom. And they have an army, and their role, the only thing is to guarantee the freedom, and no one will take the power. So, like, it's really interesting because we are excited about established royal families, and we will never challenge the concept. But if someone comes and say, like, I take over, my family will run this country, people are like, oh, no. So what does it mean? It means like, oh, the previous kings and royal families were somehow chosen by God, and so that's why we're okay with it. But like, now we can't have like new kingdoms.
Tonje Bakang, thank you very much for this segment with of Somewhere in the Middle. And definitely would love to have you on this podcast again. And my only requirement for you to come back is to stay open and stay curious.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.